Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Paige Nues. I'm a director at RettSyndrome.org, another United States organization. And for me, the work that I do with the foundation is also very personal. I have a child with Rett syndrome. Her name is Katie. She's 14 years old. I think I'll be able to go through my slides very quickly because of the nice foundation presented this morning, and also from the previous speakers who went through some of the history of Rett syndrome. Thank you for interpreting my talk. The only Spanish I speak is the name of the cities in California where I live. So San Francisco, San Diego, Monterey, that's about the extent of my Spanish. So thank you. Which, by the way, I feel like I'm at home. If you've never been to California, I invite you. Our coast is so similar to this. It's very nice. Thank you for having me. I think it's important. How many people in the room have met a child with Rett syndrome? Most of you are parents. How many of you have never met a child with Rett syndrome? One? Okay. Do we have students? Professors? Okay. So what I want to do is just very quickly, there we go, talk about the distance and the progress that we've made with Rett syndrome. And I'm not going to go over the same statistics that everyone else has shared. But really, we owe a great debt of gratitude to Dr. Andreas Rett. And this is, I'm demonstrating the global efforts and the shared relationships that we've had in the US, across Europe, across Asia, across Latin America, because Rett syndrome is a genetic disorder that does not discriminate in any way. It happens with about the same frequency in all racial and ethnic groups across the world. Dr. Andreas Rett first described Rett syndrome in an obscure journal we just celebrated the 50-year anniversary, but that in 1966. But that first 15 years or so, approximately, the knowledge of Rett syndrome in scientific and research circles sat in obscurity. Parents were living with children who had this disorder, but they didn't have a name for what was going on with her. About 15 years later on the timeline, in 1983, was when Rett syndrome really came onto the scene and became known in circles. And some of the people who have been there from that time, Dr. Alan Percy, Dr. Merce Pineda, who is not here with us, have been involved. In the next 15 years, from that time, 1983 to 1999, was really a time of discovery. It was a time of writing the diagnostic criteria, proving that Rett syndrome was not degenerative by the work of Donna Armstrong, who studied the brains of children who had passed away. It was a time of finding and diagnosing children, both the girls and the women with Rett syndrome, families who finally had a name for their disorder. And it was a time where worldwide parent associations formed and were created. And at the time, clinics were being established. Now, at that time, in a reflection of where we were with Rett syndrome, the main theme, the main tagline for most parent associations across the world during that time was care today, cure tomorrow. And that theme really reflected the reality of the situation. But in 1999, when the causative gene was discovered, was very pivotal for the entire community, when families could now stop asking ourselves, how did they have this syndrome? How did they come about this? We know why, and now the question became, what are we going to do about it? Then the race was on, and the race that we have as parent associations is against Rett syndrome. The purpose for this meeting, which I'm very excited about FinRett and the collaboration between the Spain Association and the Catalan Association, is to realize that the race is not against each other, it is not against labs, it's about collaboration because our shared race is against Rett syndrome. The next 15 years, from 1999 to about 2014, were really incredible. The amount of progress was far faster than larger disorders could ever dream of. Mouse models were developed. The disease was reversed in a mouse model. The natural history study was funded in the United States, which is the largest patient-powered study in the history, really. 1,200 girls and women were assessed by physicians hands-on in the United States to document the spectrum of the disorder. Genotype-phenotype correlates were made by these physicians, patient-derived stem cell models were created, and the first clinical trial funded by RettSyndrome.org based on a pharmacological intervention that changes the biology of Rett syndrome began. We saw the growth of clinics in the United States from 4 to 19 clinics, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is so important. So in those 15 years, when people say that not much progress was being made, there were a lot of progress being made in labs, in countries, associations, and for most of the parent associations, they were being made at the kitchen tables, in the basements and garages. Being from the Silicon Valley, I have great respect for small dreams that begin at kitchen tables and garages and grow into very important discoveries. And I'm proud to be part of an association that supports what starts as small dreams and becomes big realities. The last 3 years of progress is where most of the dots on this timeline exist. It's the first multi-site clinical trial funded by RettSyndrome.org. The first multi-site, multi-country clinical trial is underway, which is no small advancement when we're talking about how to cure our children. So as science progresses, there's a big gap between when the discoveries are made in the lab and how it's going to get into our children. For me, Katie is the most dearest, precious, gorgeous, quirky girl on the earth. But I'm not going to hand her over to a doctor who doesn't clearly understand Rett syndrome to test a therapy, whether it's a biologic or a drug or a new therapy. I think it's very important that we as associations build a bridge between the scientists and the physicians who are going to be carrying out this research that is here. I can quickly go over this. Monica talked about this. It's a little confusing, the number of associations in the U.S., but I did want to mention Kathy Hunter because the International Rett Syndrome Association was established in '83 in her kitchen table, and it was at the encouragement of Dr. Andreas Rett. He encouraged parents to come together and to respect the joy, the life, the soul that we see reflected in their eyes. Despite their physical disabilities and the medical challenges, he knew that there is more to them, and there's more that they understand, and they were worth studying. As an organization, we have funded over $41 million in research. Not awarded, but funded, an incredible amount of research. Our patient registry, the number of families registered with RettSyndrome.org was 4,482 families in the United States at the beginning of this year, so that number has grown even more. Based on those numbers and my experience across the country meeting families, I estimate there are about 7,000 living with Rett syndrome today in the United States. Many of them are still misdiagnosed or undiagnosed, or yet to be diagnosed. As an association, I want to talk a little bit about our team. We have a very, very small team at RettSyndrome.org who gets a lot achieved. In the upper left corner, we have Janice Ascano, who is a PhD, manages our grant research, our grants manager. Lower left corner is Dr. Steve Kaminsky, our Chief Science Officer. Mary Woods is our Communications Director. The ladies in the center, Amanda at the top and Brittany at the bottom, are our administrative office staff. As we've all mentioned, the funds that we've been able to award are all very small donations that come in. That's a lot of checks. That's a lot of credit card transactions. It requires a lot of administrative work to process that funds to get it to best use as possible. The center picture is Gordy Rich. He's a volunteer at our foundation. He initially formed the Rett Syndrome Research Foundation in 1999. He owns a business in Cincinnati, and he donates his office space to our foundation so that we have very low overhead, but we have a place where our administrative staff can work, and that's his beautiful daughter, Kelly, and his wife, Ann. In the lower right corner, that's me, my husband, and our 3 daughters. Katie is the oldest. We also have 2 other daughters, Melissa, who's 10, and Abby, who is 9. So for any parent in the room whose first child has Rett syndrome and who is young, I want to give you the message that life doesn't end with Rett syndrome. It's not genetic. I mean, it is genetic, but it's not hereditary, and life can and will go on, not with just the hope of our research, but your family dreams can continue. And yet, with that, the clock is ticking for all of us. You know, there's a very common equation, right? That distance is accomplished by speed and time. Our organization takes this very simple equation very seriously, and we spend our time trying to think very systematically about how we can affect each of the variables of this equation. As a parent, time is the most important one to me. About every 2 hours, a girl is born with Rett syndrome. That means in the course of this seminar, over the course of these few days, there are going to be girls born who have yet to discover that they will be living a life with Rett syndrome, and we want to change that. But time is also an issue for every girl because the disorder is progressive. It's a matter of time until her first seizure, a matter of time until her motor apraxia gets in the way of her being able to feed herself, being able to walk across a room. It's a matter of time for breathing to become an issue so that she's hyperventilating all day long and can do nothing else. It's only a matter of time until parents can't sleep at night because she doesn't sleep at night. So time is where I spend my thinking. But it's our organized research program that thinks about accelerating research and thinks about distance to travel and the speed at which we can travel at that distance. And our chief science officer has documented, and I stand fully behind, a full spectrum research approach. Basic science, clinical science, translational science, and neurohabilitation. We're the only foundation that has a very organized program in the area of neurohabilitation, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But as we said, Rett syndrome is an incredibly complex brain disorder, and we believe that multiple approaches will be needed. No 2 individuals with Rett syndrome are the same. Even if they share the same MECP2 mutation, it's unlikely that one treatment approach will treat both of those girls in the same way. In addition to the complexity of the disorder, we have to think about the age of those impacted at the time that the treatment options become available. And while pharmacological interventions are critical, both children and adults will also need neurohabilitative therapies. It's not like you just magically turn on a gene or take a pill and you know how to walk. We need people there to assist our children to develop these skills that they have yet to be able to experience. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how these 4 areas of research work together. Basic research are the discoveries of the ways to correct the biology of Rett syndrome. I agree that we don't invest a lot of our money in this area, but one important area that we do invest in is our fellowship program. We're building the bench, so to speak. Of note, the fellows that have been funded by RettSyndrome.org include some of the biggest names in Rett syndrome today. Alison Watry, Stephen Gray, Kirthni Krishnan, Monica Justice, all began with small amounts of funding from parent foundations, and they have continued to drive Rett syndrome research forward. Our translational research program is designed to turn those discoveries into treatments. Now, research in this area can include drug discovery. It includes testing compounds in both cell-based testing protocols and in preclinical animal studies using mouse models of Rett syndrome. What's unique to RettSyndrome.org is what we have called the Scout program. And it's a collaborative relationship that we have built with a pharmaceutical company and a biotech company to accelerate the screening of compounds in rigorous preclinical testing protocols using mouse models of Rett syndrome. Several compounds have had success. We have selected the ones that have the best potential in our minds to be tested in human clinical trials. One is underway right now and 2 others are in preparation. We have dozens of compounds being run through the Scout program. So we believe in a fail-fast methodology because, again, time is not on our side. I think a few of you may want to know about the clinical trials and the drugs that have come through the Scout program. So Anavex 273 is a drug that was tested in Alzheimer's and helped show some stability in Alzheimer's patients. They ran it through the Scout program and it shows great promise for Rett syndrome. That clinical trial is slated to begin in 2018 and is aimed at correcting the underlying biology of Rett syndrome. Serazotan by a company called Neuron is very exciting. We haven't invested any money in this company, but they have partnered with us because we have characterized patient population. We had the Scout program, we had an animal model for them to test, and it was a drug that had been used in Parkinson's and schizophrenia, but did not meet their endpoints. It did not meet their outcome success. But what they noticed is that in those patients, it helped with breathing issues, and that got the attention of John Bissonnette and some others. And so Neuron approached us and said, can we run our compound through your mouse model? And it showed success. The great thing about Serazotan, it is the first multi-site, multi-country clinical trial. This is incredibly important. This morning they talked about regulatory agencies and all of the barriers to keeping patients safe, to protecting intellectual property. For RettSyndrome.org, we know the hard work has to be done. We cannot bypass these agencies. So not only do we work on the compounds that we think will have great promise for our children, but we are also testing our clinicians to see, can they work together? Can they come up with common outcome measures? We are also investing in multiple mouse models, the Yenish MECP2 null mouse, the R255X mouse from the Jackson Labs, the 2158A mouse at University of Pennsylvania, and a mouse model that's currently under development by Dr. Jeff Newell is the R29X mouse. We've heard and we understand from the National Institute of Health and the federal government that it's all well and good that we do these testing in male mice, but this is primarily a female disorder and our biology is very different. And we need to be screening these drugs and testing these drugs in female mice before we bring them to our children, and we take that very, very seriously. So the clinical research program that we have, that's the third program at RettSyndrome.org, is to build a national clinical trials network in partnership with the federal government and to fully understand the clinical aspects of Rett syndrome simultaneously while conducting clinical trials. Now, the natural history study, as I mentioned, is the largest patient-powered study ever in the history of Rett syndrome, and Dr. Alan Percy is going to talk about this more tomorrow. We don't know all that we can possibly know yet about Rett syndrome. I'll share, when Katie was diagnosed, I looked at the landscape. All of us have, right? We looked and I saw parent foundations were supporting families, research was happening, not fast enough. But the question that I heard from families that I met again and again was it was very uncomfortable that they felt that they knew more about the syndrome than the doctor who was taking care of their child. So my first activity was to raise money. Our second activity was to start a Rett syndrome clinic in California at the University of San Francisco. And just recently, we had a child in the NICU who was suffering from severe respiratory disorders. Because we had the Rett clinic there and because the hospital knew about Rett syndrome, they screened her. She had a MECP2 mutation. and she never left the NICU. She did not survive past 4 months of age. In a few weeks, I'm going to be meeting a set of identical twins who are adults, recently diagnosed with Rett syndrome. One has classic symptoms, one is a lawyer. They're an example of X inactivation and skewing. The natural history study, it seems like we know all that we should know about Rett syndrome, but really there's still so much more to be classified. And for industry, for government to be interested in Rett syndrome, we must be able to document and show that we have our patient population characterized. So this is an incredibly important study that we're engaged in. The outcomes also from our clinical research program have been working on outcome measures. There's a clinical global impression scale used in many of these trials, and a clinical severity scale, which is being adopted and used in many trials. The natural history study resulted in revised diagnostic criteria in 2010. As I mentioned, genotype-phenotype correlations and understanding have expanded because of the natural history study. And probably one of the, for me as a parent, one of the best outcomes from the natural history study is that in the United States, the average age of diagnosis has fallen from the age of 4 to the age of about 2.5. And to me, that's a critical difference to have. I know for me, Katie was diagnosed at 17 months, but it was at 6 months of age when I started saying to her pediatrician, something's wrong. That was an incredibly long time to live wondering, was it what we were feeding her? Was it what she was breathing? Was there something in our heredity in our background? So we feel very strongly that this clinical program needs to be invested in. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, I'm not going to talk about these companies, but they are the companies that we are partnering with, because our foundation is not just about how much money we're investing, it's about the partnerships that we're creating and bringing people interested into the field of Rett syndrome. Neuron Pharmaceuticals has moved through a phase 2A, phase 2B, and is about to embark on a phase 3 clinical trial for Rett syndrome. They just announced last week that they've raised $11 million of the $20 million they need to conduct that phase 3 trial. That money is not coming from our organization, but they chose to partner with our foundation, again, because we had such a systematically organized science, clinics, and patients. Am I doing on time? Whoops. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about neurohabilitation research because I think this is an area that hasn't been touched on. The neurohabilitation program is unique to RettSyndrome.org, and it's focused on improving quality of life by helping maintain and improve skills that the girls and women with Rett syndrome, helping them now. But the premise of the neurohabilitation program is to reset the neurology and improve the neural networks by finding the best methods to habilitate through cognitive therapy. I don't think anyone in this room probably has a true cognitive therapy program that your child is engaged in. But I'll bet you that she has a speech pathologist. I bet you that she has an occupational therapist or a physical therapist. The truth of the matter is that all of these therapies to date have only focused and developed their methodology based on acquired injuries, such as traumatic brain injury, spinal cord, stroke, or neurodegenerative disorders, such as Parkinson's and ALS. We have yet to challenge the therapeutic community to look at neurodevelopmental disorders with the understanding of neuroplasticity. Traditional physical therapy says, because it's based on a model of cerebral palsy, says that if a girl doesn't walk by the age of 8, discontinue therapy, she's probably not going to. We have plenty of examples of women in their teens who have learned to walk for the first time. So it's a clear message to us that we can never give up on our children, and we must challenge the therapists to look at our disorder specifically to help our children today, but also to help them achieve the experiences in life that they missed while waiting for that drug or that therapy, so that they can work in concert with the biologics, with the drugs. This is laying a foundation of success for our future. This is the first time that I'm showing this slide to the room, to to really an audience. So you're seeing it for the first time, but they talked about it this morning. And it's a little bit about how in the US, our federal government thinks about any program. In our federal government, there really are specific divisions who are experts in the area of pharmaceuticals, biologics, which could be gene therapy, devices, and medical devices. And they think about their programs in terms of technical readiness levels 1 through 9. Level 1 is developing a hypothesis, testing the hypothesis, developing proof of principle, validating that hypothesis in a lab. Could mean having a pre-IND meeting with the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration. Translational research, validation in a relevant environment outside of the lab. Phase 1 clinical trial to understand if it will even be safe in humans. Phase 2 trials that may involve a new drug application or a biologic license application submitted through the FDA is technical readiness level 7. TRL 8 is phase 3 trials with limited deployment, and of course, for all of us, everything that we've been talking about today and we'll talk about over the next few days, we want to reach TRL 9, which is full deployment for all of our children. Remember how I talked about time, distance, speed? This is a little bit of the distance that we have to travel, and it's our jobs as parent associations, as researchers, as physicians who care about our children, to work on the time and the speed to cross this distance from TRL level 1 to level 9. Gene therapy is in its infancy. 5-10 years ago, didn't even make it into level 1. We have an obligation. We know the proof of concept is there for Rett syndrome. We have an obligation to focus on it and move that through the readiness levels. Reactivation of the silent X is a little bit further along that distance. Read through compounds a little bit further. But it's the drug division within the federal government of the US that has the most practice at conducting clinical trials. They're not perfect. We don't have outcome measures. We don't have biomarkers, but they've had experience. So we believe, why not invest in that? We have the best chance at moving very quickly to TR9. So we do all of those. Now, how do we fund research? Through peer review. As I said, with anything important in life, you don't just come at it haphazardly. You come at it very systematically, not with slowness, but with methodical attention. We hold an annual call for our grant programs. Every day, every week, every month, we're out in the field contacting researchers, recruiting them to come to Rett syndrome to become interested in MECP2. But we have a very clear and published program for which you can submit a grant and to possibly be funded by Rett syndrome. The importance of all of us working globally is that we can't fund every application that comes our way, even if we think it's a very good application. So we have partnered with many foundations across the world who can perhaps fund some grants that we thought had very good scientific merit, were reviewed by an independent panel, fills a program gap. Again, with RettSyndrome.org, we are going to choose the grants that are submitted to us that are of the highest quality, but aren't being done anywhere else. We don't have the time to duplicate efforts. We currently have over 40 active research grants in our portfolio. So accelerating research, natural history study, I don't want to, again, talk about too much. That's going to be in detail tomorrow, but I think it's important to think about the size of the United States and to think about in 15 years, we have been able to grow, not by funding clinics, but by developing relationships with key neurologists and key physicians at key medical research universities and children's hospitals to do multidisciplinary clinics. Of the 19 clinics that now exist, 14 of them are involved with a natural history study, and we've designated them as centers of excellence. I mentioned over 1,200 children have been enrolled in those studies. Other outcomes that we are expecting from that clinical network is development of primary care guidelines. So we have a one-sheet document that when your child is diagnosed, you can give to her pediatrician or her primary care doctor if she's a teenager or an adult. That's just a simple checklist of how often she should have an EEG or an EKG or a DEXA scan to study her bone density. These are things that the common physician doesn't have, and these are things that are outcomes from our clinical network, which is really important to the quality of life of our children. Okay, so this is the bridge of accelerating research to empowering families. So while there's currently no cure for Rett syndrome, there are many treatments that will improve the quality of life. Our children suffer from seizures, sleep, GI issues, breathing disturbances, behavioral issues, motor apraxia, osteopenia, communication challenges. They are face-bearer children, for the most part overcome by our girls every day. But research shows that by enriching their environment and integrating communication, mobility, socialization, neurosensory regulation, and optimal medical health into their lives, gives them the ability to go on and learn, and even literacy can happen. We are seeing great strides in the US with our children in school learning to read, learning to write, learning to communicate. Now, I can't say that we're responsible for those advances, but we are responsible for working with the companies that developed the eye gaze technology that can work with our children, and we're influencing the development of these technologies. And the National Institute of Health states that it is equally important to provide psychosocial support for family members as it is to treat Rett syndrome's multiple symptoms. And I think every parent here can attest to the fact that we all need support, for whether it's federal support from services or emotional support from peers and other families. So while we don't invest a lot of money into these programs, we make sure that we're developing a network of people that can be a safety net for our kids. Some other research programs that we do fund, this directly comes from our funding, is a brain and tissue bank that we are in direct control of. So we have upwards of 90 brain donations that have housed at Harvard, and we only allow tissue requests to be made if we know that the research is going to benefit Rett syndrome. We have the mutation and phenotype databases, RettBase and InterRett, which continue to collect very important data, and we host a biannual research symposium where researchers can come and discuss in private unpublished work, challenge each other with ideas, ask questions of each other, and that's an important, very important way that we bring scientific community together, both young postdocs as well as some of the minds from the biggest labs. So how else can we impact the lives of our children with Rett syndrome that is beyond funding? Advocacy. Advocacy is really important, and it has been for over 30 years. At rettsyndrome.org, formerly known by our other names, the advocacy that we have done with the government has opened up to earmarks of hundreds of millions of dollars for Rett syndrome research. Again, we didn't have to write those checks, but it took our time going to Washington, D.C., and bringing Rett syndrome, which is one of 7,000 rare diseases, to their attention and to get merit. One of the primary, a really successful endeavor that we embarked on was to get Rett syndrome included in the budget for the Department of Defense, because Rett syndrome is a brain injury. It truly is. It's now listed as one of 40 conditions that is able to compete in the peer-reviewed medical research program. Their 2017 budget was $300 million US. One of the grants submitted by one of our researchers was awarded. I can't say who it was yet or what the grant is, but that'll be announced shortly. And we've been approved to be part of the 2018 program. We don't have to be responsible for writing outcome measures and biomarkers, but we can raise the issue with our federal government. And we've asked the National Institute of Health for them to fund and convene a workshop to develop biomarkers, and that workshop is going to happen in December of 2017. Again, time, distance, speed. How can we speed that up? There's many other neurodevelopmental disorders that also suffer from a lack of biomarkers. So we've invited to join us at that workshop CDKL5, Fragile X, tuberous sclerosis, Phelan-McDermott syndrome, others that are spending their time and their resources asking the same questions as Rett syndrome. We can't afford to live in isolation. That will cost us time and speed. As an organization that is very well known and well respected, we're invited to many government meetings, academic meetings, pharmaceutical meetings, and conferences to speak about Rett syndrome and raise awareness. So not only can we accelerate research, but we have to advocate. As some of you know, in current situation with our government, we don't know if access to health care is going to still be considered a human right, and we have to do some advocacy in that area to make sure that not only research investment happens, but that drugs, devices, provision of therapies continue to be made available to our kids. We can't take any of that for granted. We spend some of our effort partnering with research to partnering with marketing companies, friends in our network who will do pro bono work for us to develop awareness videos, public service announcements, and we've been very fortunate to have some wonderful professionally done videos that can play, that we keep on our website, and families can pick up and ask the television stations and radio stations in their area to play. We advise on issues that are important to families as needed. So if they need access to equipment, if they need access to therapy, if they're being denied a school education, we can help them with justifications and authorizations to get access to the things that they need. We're a member of NORD, the National Organization for Rare Disorders, which has a counterpart here in Europe, so that we can, alone we are rare, together we are strong, I think is their key mark statement. And we participate in World Rare Disease Day, which is the last day in February each year. So to wrap up, I just wanted to talk about empowering families. I think this is what Yolanda really wanted me to talk about, and why we can still consider it very important that we maintain empowering families as part of our mission, right? So 15 years ago, our mission was care today, cure tomorrow. That was a sign of the times. Our mission now is accelerating research while empowering families, because those two things are arm-linked together. They do not have to be mutually exclusive. And yet the interest is in accelerating research, but we still have to help with those who are newly diagnosed. Remember, Rett syndrome, although a genetic disorder, is not hereditary. So for every family, they are doing this for the first time, and we have to begin at the beginning to help each one of these families understand what this road is going to be like for them. This syndrome is progressive. You go through a regression and you don't suddenly have all of your symptoms. They're going to come at you, but you're not going to read the chapter in the handbook on scoliosis until that's an issue for you. But we're there for families to talk about it. School learning communication, I already touched on, so communication is incredible. We've always known that our girls understand far more than they can express, but it's now that we're caught up with technology that they're able to speak. Katie, the other day, it was a very busy day in our house. I was making dinner, our other kids were running around, my husband had just come home from work, and Katie was on her Toby device, and she was saying, I have something to say, I have a question, I have something to say. I was like, what is it? What is it? What, you know, and while I'm doing my other things. And she all of a sudden popped off with, never mind, you're not listening anyway. And she actually said that, which is so typical for a 14-year-old, that the entire house went silent. Motor apraxia affects her every day. She is not always so consistent on her Toby, but that day she was spot on, and she was such a teenager. But the truth of the matter is, this is high technology that most special educators have no idea how to use. Most parents don't know how to program, and the companies themselves don't know how to trial a child with Rett syndrome successfully to get funded. So we have work in this area to do, and we're proud to keep that work going. Aging and adulthood, Thomas mentioned. In Europe, we have the same situation in the US. Over half of our children are over the age of 18, and we have done little to no work to help our women live happy lives, to help with the transition in medical care. So at Texas Children's Hospital, Judy Barish, we're working on a medical transition program because our women should not be seen in children's hospitals, but there's a real gap in neurologists and general physicians who know how to take care of our adults. So we're working on that. We have to help families as they work through the death of their children, or they worry that they may outlive, their children might outlive us. Fundraising and volunteerism is the foundation by which all of our work can happen, and building a community of emotional support and practical, factual information cannot be left behind, and it must continue. We do these things through many ways. We don't invest money in this. This is just time. This is the time of volunteers, building the content on our website, writing the handbook, which I believe has been translated into Spanish and lives on both the Spain Association website and the Catalan Association website. We have a 100-day post-diagnosis pathway. We have primary care guidelines. We have emerging standards of care, which we are working on in collaboration with the UK medical network. We provide parent-to-parent support. We have about 100 parent volunteer reps who are available to talk to families anytime, day or night. We host conferences and webcasts. We host a Rett Getaway, which is once a year. Oh gosh, if you guys could come this year. There's an all-inclusive theme park that has been built in San Antonio, Texas, where every child can ride on a train, go fishing in a pond, can go through a water park. They have to lend 50 waterproof wheelchairs for everyone, so the whole family can come to this Rett Getaway, and it's in September. We keep our community connected through social media. Our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter fans continue to grow. And we have found that the research understanding by our families varies so much that we have to produce a video series in just little microbites. And you're invited to our website to watch any of these. It's called Rett Rounds with Dr. K, where we take the most common questions that we're asked through that we're asked through email, or that we see asked repeatedly on social media, and we answer those questions. Because if 5 people ask a question, 100 more are asking the same question. So these are some of the ways that we empower families. I wanted to share one more personal story. That's my daughter, Katie, and my youngest, when she was 6 years old, she came home from school and she asked what she should do if she found the cure for Rett at school. And she thought that it was something tangible, something that already existed, but had just simply been misplaced. Now, we know differently. But the very concrete thinking of siblings and aunts and uncles and grandmothers, that this cure is just going to come, is a difficult conversation to have, but it's one that we had to have, and I had to explain to her that it doesn't exist yet, but not yet, and that's the key word, not yet. It will. We are all discoverers and inventors, and we invite everyone to join us and be part of this truly amazing journey. We know you won't regret it. Together, we will care and cure. These are the associations across the U.S. and around the world that we work with every day. We have a history of 30 years working with many of these associations who have changed in generations of leadership. I think we're at a pivotal time where we have younger parents who are taking over these associations, again, who have more of a mission of accelerating research, but also a mission to care for children. There's an expression, and I think this environment brings it to mind, which is that the rising tides raise all ships. And if we all work together, we know that we can all accomplish great things. So I'm very proud that here in Spain you are overcoming some of the differences and coming together to rise the tides for all of our ships. And I look forward to being a part of your successful future. So thank you to the organizers for the seminar. Together we are making progress.
¿Me dais 5 minutos, un minuto? Porque ahora había una mesa redonda, se nos ha ido el tiempo y no sé si nos van a permitir un ratito para poder hacer preguntas a estos 4 últimos ponentes. ¿Me dais un minuto?